Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to a really cracker interview today with Trevor Louden, who's back with us, the author of Comrade Prime Minister, who we spoke to just before the election. Today's Tuesday, the 20th of May, and it's 9 o'clock exactly in Australia Eastern Standard Time. And Trevor Louden is coming to us from New York City. And as we speak, thousands and hopefully tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people are gathering in Melbourne for a protest. Fire trucks are descending upon Melbourne from country fire authority stations all around the state, and farmers are turning up en masse. It's about time, thank goodness. And things are changing, and we're going to unpack the reason why as we discuss matters post-election with Trevor Louden. Trevor Louden, great to have you on again, mate. Thank you.
Oh, thanks very much, Graham. It's great to be here, and good to see you, John, and all of viewers. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. Look, we got a great response from your last interview. I believe your book sales even went up, spiked a little bit.
Oh, I do. Considerably. Yeah, they did very, very well. And this is still, look, I'm selling almost as many now after the election. Well, actually more now after the election than before the election.
Right. And the whole process is not to help you sell books, although we're glad you are, because this information needs to get out. So let's look at the state of play, John. After that interview last night with Miles Keith, the CFA guy, that did get a little bit heated because some things were said. Not heated with Miles because he just stated it like it is, but the state of the country was clearly demonstrated. And the reason why we're not gaining any traction was demonstrated by some comments he made about Victoria Police, which we really emphasised. Now, the state of play, as I thought about it last night in the wee small hours of the morning after that interview, is this. We have woken up to a hangover. A lot of us have. A lot of us, sadly, the majority of Australians are blissfully still asleep. But those of us who start to understand how this is playing out are realising that we are in a state that is as follows. The decimation of the opposition party in Australia by Labor has probably been helped by a lot of factors, and we'll discuss that as we talk to Trevor. That decimation has political pundits saying that it will take 2 or 3 election cycles before the Liberal National Party, if it still maintains any credibility, will be able to fight back to government. So effectively, those who know, and I'm not a political scientist, those who know are saying that we are doomed to a Labor government for at least 10 years, if that's true, unless something dramatic happens to change it. Now, we've got this situation where the Labor Party got 34% of the vote. That means 66% of Australians didn't vote for them. But here we are in this ridiculous situation. Compulsory voting has led to this because uneducated people are being forced to vote and they have no idea, nor do they care. We've got universities that are indoctrinating our young people through uni to vote a certain way, to think a certain way. And so that area needs to be tidied up. And isn't it ironic, Johnny Larder, how the election had to be finished before the Victorian government, to cover up the financial mess left by Daniel Andrews, brought in a bill that would have probably cost the federal government its election had that bill been passed prior to the election. You know, that's a realisation that I had last night. And the other thing is this: we know from political informers inside Melbourne, inside Spring Street, and the Victorian government, that Daniel Andrews is more influential now behind the scenes than he was before. So we've got a lot to unpack with you, Trevor Louden. John, any comments before we go to Trevor?
Well, and not only that, Hoodie, but overnight, 124 out of 124 delegates have voted in favour of the pandemic handling with the WHO. So it moves on, and I think 11 abstained, but it's a joke. So we've apparently got a bit of time up our sleeves now because there's some annex that was sort of left out. So maybe 12 months to fix this up, but it demonstrates where we're heading. Then we've got the IHRs coming up in July. So we're in real trouble. I mean, this is tip of the iceberg stuff. What's going on down in Victoria at a global level, it's much worse.
But we truly are in a mess. And of course, card-carrying communist health minister Mark Butler is all fired up to go this way, and see Australia's health administration given over to the World Health Organization, the United Nations. What a disaster! What could possibly go wrong? And let's unpack this, Trevor. I mean, you've had a chance to look at the election results in Australia. I'm sure you're not surprised, are you?
Well, I was a little bit surprised at how strong Labor's victory was, but we understand it's 34% of the vote. It was all about the preferences and that kind of thing. And I think you'd have to say that the Liberals ran a pretty weak campaign, and that really helped Labor a lot. So I thought Labor might win, but not quite as much, by not quite as much. But here's the thing. There were reports coming out that Chinese communities in key district, key electorates in Melbourne and Sydney had a 30% swing to Labor. Now, why was that, I wonder? Because the Chinese Communist Party clearly told them who their favored candidate was. See, this is the penalty for uncontrolled immigration from China. The Chinese who come here at the sufferance of the Chinese Communist Party, and they are policed, they are monitored, they are spied on by the Chinese, they have relatives overseas. And when China says things like handsome boy Albanese and starts firing off guns around your coast, they know who they're meant to vote for. And so this is hundreds of thousands of people, and I can tell you what, it'll be double by the next 3 years if Albanese has his way. So this is how they do it. They're changing the ethnic composition of Australia to bring in lots and lots of third worlders, and particularly Chinese, who will vote exactly as the Chinese Communist Party tells them. This is exactly what's happened in Canada and also parts of California and other places around the world. The Chinese have great power over their expat communities. Not the old 150-year, gold rush Chinese. I'm talking about the Chinese that have come here in the last 30 years. They are a block for communist China and a significant block in Melbourne, Sydney, and other places.
And of course, the new hate speech legislation that the government's been forcing through, and aided and abetted by some very strange bedfellows in Australia, is just making it impossible to even have this conversation very soon.
Well, that's why we'll see. I look at the origins of hate speech around the world in America, Australia, New Zealand. It's always driven by the Maoists. The hate speech laws are driven by the pro-Chinese communist elements. They started in the United States in the 90s, where a Chinese man was murdered in Michigan, a man called Vincent Chin. And the pro-Chinese communists used that killing because he was murdered allegedly because he was an Asian. They thought he was actually Japanese. This was in Michigan, and so people have been laid off from a factory, and they thought it was because of Japan, and they killed this guy. But that Vincent Chin case was used to bring in the first hate speech legislation in the United States. It is completely driven by pro-Chinese communists with the aim of shutting down any criticism of China's expansion into your country. That's the whole purpose of this. That's what it's done for.
Dear, oh dear. It's an absolute show, isn't it? I presume, Trevor, you watched the interview we did with Senator Ron Johnson, and he was pretty.
No, I haven't seen it, but Graham just told me a little bit about it before.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was pretty clear that the situation with the WHO is a clear and present danger to our national interests with what's going on. I mean, you obviously know a lot about New Zealand. You're in the States. Um, it's interesting, isn't it, that Sir Winston Peters is essentially said, well, we can make up our own mind in regards to how we manage a pandemic. The states, through Donald Trump, have effectively done the same thing by exiting the WHO. But our communist lot, Butler and Albanese, are up there with the fountain pen ready to go. I mean, they're putting their
Yeah,
risk,
Butler and Albanese are both have Marxist backgrounds, but this is the thing. The World Health Organization is run by Tedros from Ethiopia. He was put in there by the Chinese Communist Party. He is a Maoist communist from Ethiopia, a leader of the Tigray People's Front, an absolute Marxist, no question whatsoever, and a complete puppet of China. Now he's engineered it so a whole bunch of countries in the world have signed up to give to give the World Health Organization, meaning China, complete control over your health policies should there be another pandemic. But the other thing that a lot of people haven't realized, and I've done a couple of documentaries on this, the head of the compliance unit in the World Health Organization, that is the unit that crafts the messages to terrify us into complying. And it's run by social scientists and psychologists, so they know which buttons to push, how to get us terrified, how to get us to accept these mandates, etc. The head of that unit is Susan Mickey of Great Britain. She ran through the SAGE organization. She basically ran Boris Johnson's response to COVID. And they called her the mask Nazi. They said she was the one who said we might have to wear masks for the rest of our lives. She was hardcore masks, vaccines, the hardest of the hardcore. Now she's in that position. She is head of the compliance unit. She's a social psychologist. She has run training programs in China and Cuba for the communist governments, and she is a 50-year veteran of the Communist Party of Britain. She is a communist royalty, not just a Communist Party member, but is the nearest you can get to Communist Party royalty in Britain. Her parents were both big-time pro-Soviet communists, and she is so hardcore, the other communists used to call her a tankie, meaning she was the one who supported the tanks going into Czechoslovakia in 1968. You know, when a lot of the other communists, including some of the Australians, that was a bit too far for some of them, you know. But she was a hardcore tankie. She was all about the tanks. Now she will be in charge of the compliance unit of the World Health Organization, and Tedros will be the top dog, and the top dog over all of them will be Xi Jinping. So this is handing Australia's health response to China. There's no other way to put it. That's what it's doing.
Trevor, it's clear to anybody who can think stuff through, pragmatically, that the nature of war has changed. We've gone from throwing rocks at each other to intercontinental ballistic missiles. But all those things used to destroy infrastructure. The way we wage war now is totally different, because after the First World War, it took decades to rebuild. If you wage war the way the Chinese communists are waging it at the moment, you don't have to rebuild infrastructure. You own it. You take it over. Now, what I want to really make sure for all of our audience and anyone watching this that it's shared with, this is not about hating the Chinese here in Australia. It's not about hating Jews. It's not about hating Muslims. It's not about hating Christians. This has happened in your country. If you're a proud Australian, then you have responsibility for this, because you have not cared enough to vote effectively to make sure the policies that allowed this to happen. It's our fault. So let's stop, putting the Chinese in our sights and the Jews and the Nazis and all the rest of it. This has happened on our watch. We have a responsibility. And hatred of other races in our country, it's futile, it leads nowhere, and all it does is bring pain and agony to a whole bunch of people, us included. So let's get a really logical grip on this and see it for what it is. It happened because you let it happen.
That's absolutely right. we're in the West. Most of us are losing our freedom, not because the globalists and the communists are that clever, but that we've been so slack and so apathetic and so damn lazy for too darn long. That's just the way it is. We live in these rich countries. Living in this, growing up in Australia or New Zealand or Canada or the United States, you are one of the most privileged people on the planet. You've got it easier than anybody else has got it. It can be a hard life, but it's still a lot easier than growing up in Sri Lanka or Brazil or somewhere like that. But that tends to breed a little bit of apathy and a little bit of complacency and a little bit of carelessness. It's always going to be this way. How could we lose this? Well, look, if you lived through Daniel Andrews for a couple of years destroying Victoria, and you lived through Albanese and his voice referendum, and you see what's coming next, you'll see very soon how we can lose freedom in Western countries. This is the aim of Albanese's Labor government, which is a communist-controlled entity, is to centralise power to the degree in Australia that it cannot be decentralised. That there will be no effective opposition for a dozen years. And you imagine what Australia is going to be like in 10 years, with 10 years of Albanese and his successors doing what they damn well like, backed up by the Greens. They intend to make Australia into the South Pacific Venezuela. That's what they intend to do. They are just as communist as Hugo Chavez or Xi Jinping or Fidel Castro. And that sounds pretty horrific to your average Australian voter. But I wrote a book, a 400-page book, to back that up. And not one of them's ever challenged it on a point of fact yet. I wrote it so Australians could understand how serious this is and how they better get stuck in.
What do you think, Trevor, are some of the solutions? I mean, I see in the not too distant future that the main problem is this WHO and what's sort of on our doorstep. What are their weaknesses? I mean, are you is there something we can do? I mean, have one of these bureaucrats been visiting pedophile islands or something? I don't know. What can we expose these grubs with?
Well, not that I know of, and you might be able to take one or two of them out that way. But look, what their weakness is there's a lot more of us than there are of them. There's a lot more decent Australians who just want to live a good life, be productive citizens, honest, raise their kids well. There's a lot more people who want to live that way than there are who want to live in a top-down, progressive state. So that's an advantage right from the start. We also have a lot of decent counterculture media like yourselves. So those are advantages right there. The big thing we're lacking is leadership in the conservative movement. I don't see any understanding from the Liberal Party on why they lost or what's needed to turn it around. I don't see. It's just arranging the deck chairs that I can see. There's nobody is really standing up with any great vision there, and so this is taking things right for the next few years. I think is taking things right back to local level as much as you can, winning those local government positions, standing up against the Green mandates, from taking over a little town in New South Wales and saying no to the government, like the farmers are doing in Victoria now. They are standing very firmly against the federal government, and they'll get a lot of public support for that. Well, that kind of thing has to be multiplied over multiple issues all around the country. And I think Graham will appreciate this. I think ultimately not everybody's going to do this, but a lot more Australians have to have a deeper spiritual foundation here, and really treat this as a battle between good and evil. and that we have to get we have to understand this is a battle between good and evil and sort our own lives out, be cleaner people, and try and get more people faith oriented. That's going to be a factor in this, and not everybody's going to respond to that.
No.
But didn't God save some cities in way back then for 4 or 5 righteous people in a town?
Yep.
I think that's we got to look at this in a macro and a micro level. We got to look at what we can do with ourselves, our families, and our local communities, but also try and spread these resistance movements across states. This isn't just going to hurt the farmers in Victoria. This kind of thing is we're going to see farmers in Queensland and Western Australia. See, the farmers are the enemies of Labor. They don't tend to vote Labor.
Yep.
So who's going to be paying the bills for Labor's exorbitant expenditure? It isn't going to be they're going to try and not hurt their base as much as possible, and they're going to try and hurt the opposition's base as much as possible. That's going to be the tactic going forward. So we got to identify right now who the sectors are that are going to come to grief and start organising amongst those sectors, because you can see it coming.
Yeah, look,
I bet you Albanese's not sorry that doesn't have a lot of sympathy for these farmers who are getting socked with the results of Daniel Andrews' just crazy expenditure. Albanese's not going to be. He might be worried about the reaction to it, but he's certainly not worried about the farmers who may lose their farms because of it.
Do you have any sort of evidence at all in your research that the Communist Party has infiltrated the Liberal Party? Because it seems like it's the same. I mean, Susan Ley now has won the leadership. She's pretty left of centre. She will never be Prime Minister because she won't last long enough, and she doesn't represent anything that looks like an opposition in the way she thinks. She thinks like Labor. So the situation being that any shining light that might be just under the basket in the Liberal Party is hanging on because they want to be there at the end and come home for the big finish. So, Andrew Hastie and guys like that, and even they don't shine out. There's only one Liberal that I see that could possibly bring the Liberal Party back to dominance as a federal opposition, and that's Alex Antic, the senator in South Australia. But he's playing his cards.
Alex Antic, yeah, Antic, yeah.
Yeah. So he is.
Well, he's a very strong conservative. I know that much about him.
But he can't do anything in the Senate. I mean, he can do great things with laws in the Senate, but not when you haven't got a majority. So he's still got to get out of the Senate into the lower house. Maybe that will happen. I don't know. But we've got to face the potential of 10 years with Labor, hard Labor.
Well, see, this is the thing. You got guys like Antic, and there will be others that come through. I think, this happened with Trump. Things had to get pretty darn bad in America before people would accept someone like Trump who was a bit out of the box. And I don't think that's happened in the Liberal Party right now. The Liberal Party has still got a lot of lefties in it. And when you say, have they infiltrated, I'd say it's more like China likes to do deals with certain Liberals if they can do it. The Chinese work with Labor because Labor's halfway communist anyway, so they're ideologically sympathetic, like Daniel Andrews, but they also get some money as well. But they get the Liberals, as they do the Republicans in the United States, through money. We'll give you a directorship on a Chinese bank. We'll set up a big battery factory in your district. We'll do this. We'll do that. And this, look, if you're accepting Chinese money, even if it's not directly to you, but for a factory in your district or a business, it's like bringing the mafia into your area. It's not just about the money. They're not just businessmen. All of these businessmen, Chinese businessmen, are part of the CCP. So any Liberal or National Party figure who is doing business in any way with the Chinese is going to be compromised right off the top. They're, at the very least, they're not going to criticize China because they've got money at stake, or they've got a factory in their district, or there's a big Chinese community in their district that they can't afford to offend. And so that's how they get the right. That's how they get the Liberals and the National Party guys. And I think the National Party is I think is less corrupted. The Liberals, because they're more urban, they tend to get corrupted more, where the country guys tend to keep their values a bit better. But that's a generality, of course. There's bad guys in every party and a few good ones, you know.
Johnny, we saw Penny Wong lobbying pretty hard the Chinese communities in Melbourne and Sydney. She was going to close dinners that were only available to Chinese. Australians weren't allowed to go. Town hall meetings for Chinese Australians only. And yet they turn around and call us racist. You know what I mean? It's crazy. But clearly she played her cards very well. She's a very astute communist, is Wong.
Mm.
Look, and for a long time back, you know, the Chinese community in Australia, they would see Penny Wong as Communist China's representative in your government. So if she's in Labor, they should be in Labor. If she switched tomorrow to Liberal, if you know she's not going to, but if she did, they would switch to Liberal too.
Mm.
Gee. Now, what about at state level, Trevor? What has your research shown you about who are the people we should be watching at state level? Have you gone that far?
Oh, look! If you gave me some names, I could certainly talk to you about it. Like I know that the Greens have, you know, they've just switched leadership, but what's her name? Not Sarah Hanson-Young, Larissa Waters.
Yep.
She comes out of the Search Foundation thing, the same as Adam Bant did, so there'll be no change there. She was very involved. She was very close to Claire Moore, who was the Labor senator from Queensland, who was a Search Foundation member, and also to Drew Hutton, you know, one of the founders of the Green Party, who was also a Search Foundation member and a revolutionary Marxist-Leninist by his own confession. But on state level, you'd have to give me a bit of a background before I could really identify, you know. I know a lot of the names in that, but you know, I just see them consolidating their power in Victoria and New South Wales and a little bit in Queens. You know, they've made gains in Queensland, and that's all they really care about, those three states.
WA, after you know, how many years with Mark McGowan, decimated by Mark McGowan, came back to Labor in a huge way in Western Australia.
Yeah. But you know, like, and that's important. But it's the big city. It's the big three. Is really Queensland and New South Wales and Victoria that they care most about. A little bit about South Australia, a little bit about Western Australia. But if they can consolidate their power in Brisbane and Melbourne and Sydney, that's really what their Labor's focus is, and the Greens' focus.
Johnny.
What's the chances, Trevor, of a documentary, you know, exposing what's going on here with the Search Foundation? I mean, what the Chinese actually own in Australia, what their interests are, who they're affiliated with. I don't see the media as the case happened in COVID. I don't see them willing to put their toe in the water here.
Yeah, well, they're not, you know. Like, I had an agent here who got me quite a few interviews, including with you, and they were very productive. But other than Chris Smith, I didn't really, you know, nobody in the Fox News, you know, nobody in Sky or whatever, the big conservative media, they wouldn't touch this stuff. It's a bit like Fox News in America. They will touch certain things, but there's certain places they will not go. And I think the same situation happens here. They will not touch communism. They will not really go deeply into China. They'll go around the edges of it. They'll make noises, but they don't do any serious investigative journalism on the Chinese influence, the communist influence with your Labor MPs, your Green MPs, etc. And so, yeah, documentary is an idea I've certainly been toying with, and I think there's more than enough material in my book to put out a very shocking documentary that if it was put out, say, in the next year, you'd have 2 years to spread it around Australia. And I think it would make a considerable difference in the next election, because it's the kind of thing that can be passed. They can't stop you passing stuff from hand to hand, even if you have to get yourself a DVD player, and put, pass DVDs around and make copies of DVDs. Stuff like that can be seen by millions of Australians. I know that I participated in the making of a movie. I was part of it, Agenda Grinding America Down. Agenda Grinding America Down and two of the Masters of Deceit back in 2010. That was seen by 10 million people in the United States. That was the reason, in my opinion, that and Glenn Beck, why the Republicans won the House in 2010 and stopped immigration amnesty and slowed down Obamacare, because of my friend Curtis Bauer's movie. That movie also went round Brazil, translated into Portuguese, and was regarded as a big part of bringing Bolsonaro to power in Brazil. So there is huge power in these things.
And I think
Because you're not going to get the mainstream media touching any of this.
Kim Staten with Assange.
Sorry?
Kim Staten with the Assange film. I think that contributed very heavily towards his subsequent release. And
look, no doubt, no doubt. I think if you want to change public opinion in a big way, the Vax, the Vax DVD of movies and that sort of thing, it's done massive changes. I think a good documentary on Albo and his movement and a bit about the Chinese, I think you could see 5, 6, 7 million Australians seeing it in the next couple of years. And that would put a heck of a lot of pressure on some of these Liberal MPs, and they wouldn't be able to hide anymore and pretend that they didn't know. So yeah, I'm certainly looking at it. If somebody comes in with a proposal, I'd be certainly very interested, that's for sure.
Well, we know that a lot of financially influential people watch what we're doing, and let's put out a call on those of you who are watching who support issues like this, who supported the Julian Assange movie and others. Here's an opportunity. I think this is a vital component to getting a balance of power back in Australia that's vitally needed. The other thing I want to say to you, Trevor, too, is I did go to the site to download the documentary you're talking about. I paid for it, as I expected to do, but I couldn't screen it, and there was an issue. And when I contacted the support arm of that organisation, I got nothing back. So you might want to chase that up.
I will absolutely chase it up. Can you email me after about that? Oh, I just want to. So this is the Enemies Within the Church movie we're talking about.
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah, that's, and because I know it's been screened in Australia. I know people have got it. So okay, I'll call a director tonight and find out what's going on.
Yeah, I fell in love with the trailer and I couldn't wait to watch it. So I've been a bit disappointed that I haven't been able to.
The site was still live, but it just wouldn't download, or what happened?
Yeah, there was an issue with downloading it, and then I immediately did what I was instructed to do on the message I got, and contacted the support arm, and I've had nothing back. So it's not about the money. I'm just really wanting to watch the video.
No. I want you to see it too, and it's a bit embarrassing to me that this should happen. So I will certainly, straight after this interview, I'll be on to Mr. Saul and see what's going on.
No,
we'll get something to you as quick as possible.
No, that's great, mate. And look,
and to make sure nobody else has a similar problem.
I think that what you're saying about the documentary, I'm glad you raised that, John, because people will sit down and watch something like that. You can't keep that sort of thing undercover. You can try and censor it all you like, but we've got a small window of opportunity to help people wake up even more. We've been saying for a long time, Trevor, that those who slept through COVID will be poked and woken up by things like what's going on in Victoria today, which has nothing to do with COVID, although indirectly it does, because the financial mismanagement of Victoria was deeply rooted in the way that state handled the COVID mandates and vaccine rollout. It's clear that they're getting everyday Australians, mainly farmers, to pay out their deficit as a result of that. And still we hear that Daniel Andrews is very active within and from behind. This is a typical communist ploy, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's like in 1990, the Sandinistas lost the election in Nicaragua, the communists, and they gave it to a Democratic candidate won, but they still ran everything underneath. They still ran, and then they came back anyway, and now they're in control and they're just suppressing everybody. So Daniel Andrews, yeah, he may not be the figurehead now, but yeah, he would still be running things because he is China's man in Victoria. That man loves China like a chocolate. He seriously does. You know, he tried to bring the Belt and Road into Victoria, you know, against the wishes of the of Scott Morrison's government. And you don't bring the Belt and Road into your state unless you're completely in bed with China. And he was going there all the time. He's very close to the unions in Victoria, who are run by the Communist Party of Australia, Marxist-Leninist, which is an openly and overtly pro-Chinese communist group. And that's why I've said, you know, all the states around the world, all the places around the world that had the heaviest lockdowns tend to be the places with the most Chinese influence in the local government. And that's why Victoria got the worst lockdowns in Australia, because the Chinese control Victoria more than any other state, probably followed by New South Wales, I would say. And, but other states, you know, they were bad, but not as bad as Victoria. And the same in the United States. You know, California got it worst, Oregon, Hawaii, Massachusetts, New York, Michigan. They're all the states with the most Chinese influence, where the Chinese control certain politicians and the unions. So the unions were controlled by the Chinese, and they used them to shut down the businesses and the schools and everything else they wanted to do, because it was not about public health. It was all about doing maximum damage to your economy in the name of public health and impoverishing Australians, which makes you easier to control.
Yeah, Johnny.
And this stuff's probably not limited to major cities, I suppose, Trevor. You know, I can imagine that they're very clever and the tentacles come out to regional areas as well, to hide what they're up to.
Yeah, well, you know, if you look at towns like Ballarat and Bendigo and Victoria, they got big left-wing control out in those areas. You know, obviously Perth, but also, you know, a lot of areas in New South Wales, of rural New South Wales, have got big pockets of left-wing control. So yeah, they spread it around, and you've got all this regionalism and these UN agenda type things, and you know, super councils and that. All of this is guided by the Chinese, and you get conservatives who buy into this stuff, you know, because they can make money out of these councils sometimes.
Who's the Victorian MP who is the member for the area of Bendigo? Jacinda Allen, the state premier.
Yes, Jacinda Allen. Yeah.
Now, what do we know about her?
Well, I know that she is certainly very much on the fringes of the Search Foundation. She came out of Young Labour Left, which is pretty much controlled by the Search Foundation. And, you know, from the left faction, the socialist left faction. And the Search Foundation's got a bit of a base in her area, and she works with some of their people. I know that much for sure. So she's certainly in their orbit. No question.
Some of the Labor faithful, they all laud Gough Whitlam, they laud Bob Hawke, and to a lesser extent Paul Keating. Give us a little bit of a background about those three individuals, what you know about them.
Yeah, well, all of them were Fabians, for one thing. But, Hawke and Keating were sort of regarded as more on Labour's right, whereas Whitlam was on the left, hardcore communist left. And he had a lot of people around him, like Uren and
Jim
Tom Uren sorry?
Jim Cairns.
Jim, that's the one I was thinking of. I met Jim Cairns once at the Prawn Market in Melbourne
I did
in
too.
his latter days. Okay, he had a little stall there selling his little socialist books. But that Labor government, that 72, 75 Labor government, was heavily controlled by the communists. That was very much, and Gough Whitlam. He was the one who recognised China. He, basically sold out Taiwan and moved Australia's into China, Australia into China's orbit. Hawke did the Accord in '83. That was completely a Communist Party of Australia operation. The Accord came 100% out of the Communist Party of Australia, and it was designed to give the Communist Party by doing the communists controlled the unions, and the deal was we'll bring the unions and the government more closely together so we can have more union input into government policy. But that was communist input into government policy. So Hawke would play the game of being this pro-American, pro-right wing, whatever, but he was a Fabian and he was happy to do a deal with the Communist Party. And Keating was happy to carry on with that or try and do it. The Accord fell apart because the Communist Party fell apart, back in the late 80s and that kind of thing. Things weren't going well for the communist movement back then. So look, even the right faction of Labor has its deep, deep issues. Most of them are Fabians. Many of them should be in the left-wing faction. And they will, they will play the more centrist game. They will, pretend to be a bit more pro-Western and a bit, more conservative social values. But they will still work with the left when they have to. Like Patrick Dodson, the senator, I think he's out now, but out from Western Australia, the Aboriginal guy, so-called from the right faction of Labor, but absolutely works with the Search Foundation and the communists on the voice referendum. He was a big part of that, but he was from the right faction. So the left faction is communist, but so are some of the right faction. And Bob Hawke absolutely collaborated with the communists at the top levels. And if Gough Whitlam wasn't a communist, I'm a monkey's uncle.
Well, we have, when you talk about the Wages Accord in 1983. In 1989, there was an industrial dispute involving Australian airline pilots, and it brought the nation to its knees. And I was involved in that. I was caught up in it. And I have to tell you that Hawke did everything he could to crush that because that dispute was challenging his accord. And he went really hard. He brought in foreign airlines to fly over Australian domestic routes. He brought in foreign pilots from airlines in America, in particular, and Europe, to take the jobs of Australian pilots, and he totally crushed it. He absolutely crushed it, and it was like his life depended on it. It was
because it did. He'd done a deal. See, this is the thing, you had a genuine movement to get better conditions for the pilots and whatever. But the whole deal of the compact or the accord was to see, you've got to understand the communists don't want rich workers. They don't want workers to do well. They want workers to stay at the bottom of the heap and keep paying their union dues so they can use them to get deals with the government. The deal is you give us input into the government and we'll maintain labor discipline. We'll keep the workers under control. And when a genuine movement came out to try and get some real gains for a workforce that was outside the accord parameters, absolutely he will crush you. Look, I'd love to tell a story if I may. Well, there's two stories. In New Zealand in the 80s, we elected the Socialist Labour government under David Longy, and we destroyed the ANZUS alliance by banning nuclear warships from the harbours. At the same time, that was all organised from Moscow. I knew people who were in Moscow organising that because it was all about breaking up the Western Alliance. But at the time, the Socialist Unity Party under Ken Douglas completely controlled the New Zealand unions. And then the right wing of the Labour Party started implementing these economic reforms. They privatised the rail, they slashed government jobs, they slashed all the agricultural subsidies. People were driving their tractors up the street of Parliament. Workers were getting laid off, and the unions did nothing. Not a thing for years.
Ring a
The
bell,
militant, because the deal had been done between the right and the left. The right, you get the economic policy, but the left gets the foreign policy. So the foreign policy, which was guided by the Soviet Union, was important to the Soviets. So the deal was made, we'll sell out the New Zealand workers, we'll lay them off, 50,000, doesn't matter, as long as we maintain the foreign policy. But here's this one I'd love to tell you. The friend who told me this was a New Zealander who infiltrated our Socialist Unity Party for our security services, your equivalent of ASIO. He was an ASIO guy inside the Communist Party. In 1983, he went to Moscow to train at Lenin's Institute for Higher Learning. That's where a lot of your communists used to go and train 6 months, 3 months, and whatever. So part of the trip, he was there for 3 months. Part of the trip was they got to see the Moscovich car factory. This was a big car factory in downtown Moscow, built by the Italians, that turned out these Fiat 125 knockoffs, the Lada car. And it was super mechanized. It was the most state-of-the-art factory you've ever seen. And they were shown what a wonderful factory, the Soviet factory, and it's great. Now, my friend was in this little delegation. They were all told they were not allowed to go to the toilet while they were there. Okay, they were not allowed to go to the toilet. But my friend was a bit of a rebel, and he had to go, and he snuck away from the delegation. He found what looked like a restroom, opened the door, and all he sees is a concrete floor with little pipes sticking up out of it, and bits of newspaper and hose. You squat over a pipe and you wash it down. You use the newspaper and you wash it down, and no cubicles, just open.
Yep.
And it was filthy, disgusting. So we went back, found his delegation, and went to the tour guide. Said, "What about the dignity of the Soviet worker? I've just been to your restroom. It's disgusting. How do you explain this in this modern factory?" And he pulled him aside. He said, John, he said, "Keep quiet." He says, "You got to understand, we can't trust the worker. If we had cubicles in that restroom, the workers might go and smoke a cigarette while they're supposed to be working. They might read a newspaper while they're supposed to be working. They might even commit a homosexual act while they're supposed to be working." So my friend went back to New Zealand and met with Ken Douglas, who was the head of the Socialist Unity Party and the head of the union movement, like Sally McManus in your country. And he told him this incident and how disgusted he was at what he had seen, and the dignity of where's the dignity of the Soviet worker? And Ken Douglas, the top unionist in the country, the champion of the worker, the top communist, said to him, "John, don't you understand? You've been a communist for a while now. Don't you understand?" He said, what do you mean? He says, "If we ever get power in New Zealand, we're going to treat those worker bastards exactly the same way." So that's how your communist unions care about workers. They don't give a damn. They are using workers as meat in the sandwich to get what they want, which is total centralized power.
It's funny you should say that, because a prolific author in a church that I have been sort of raised in my Christian life since 2006, talks about the evil of the trade union movement and how it'll be used to bring down the world before the time that Jesus comes back. We're to avoid trade unions with everything we can. And everything you've illustrated clearly demonstrates that while they do great work in some areas, and there are some organisations, like we're seeing a dispute going on at the moment for over 40 Victorian firefighters who were mandated out of a job. Now, at the moment, they're in the Fair Work Commission in Australia, and it's looking like Fire and Rescue Victoria, their employer, wants them back. But they're actually fighting the Victorian Firefighters Union in the Fair Work Court. The reason I believe that Peter Marshall, the grub who runs that union, is doing what he's doing to them is because they represent another organisation that they set up called the Australian Firefighters Alliance, which is about giving proper industrial representation to firefighters around the country. And they're affiliating with organisations in America, people who I've met while I was over there. It's clear to see that he's fighting hard to keep them out of the fire stations because he sees his union under threat from this new one.
Yeah, he said, look, you got genuine unions who try and do things for workers, but if you've got communists controlling your unions, their loyalties to the Communist Party and their job is to maintain discipline of the workforce. They don't want these wildcat unions. They don't want any competition at all. Like I'll give you another example of this. It's fair to say that illegal immigration in America has done a lot of damage to the American workforce, undermined wages and conditions, broken strikes. It has really hurt the American worker, especially the people at the bottom of the rung, young black kids and whatever. They get their jobs taken by illegal immigrants. The unions up until 1994 were some of the few in the Western world that were not controlled by communists. But in 1994, and they were very militantly anti-illegal immigration. They used to have people on the border stopping illegal immigrants. It was their policy to absolutely condemn illegal immigration because it was bad for the union movement. Okay. 1994, the Marxists took over the American unions. They put in John Sweeney as the president. 4 years later, they flipped their policy to supporting illegal immigration, to bring in millions of illegals across the border, not knowing that it would hurt their members. But the bigger picture was it would bring in millions of more Democrats who would then form a majority that couldn't be beaten. It would give them complete power. So they were willing to sacrifice the livelihoods of their workers to bring all these illegals in because the long-term goal was complete power. So the goal of the communist unions is complete power over all workers. So they're not going to tolerate, anybody breaking away, anybody giving their workers a better deal. They'll give their workers crumbs, but they're not going to tolerate somebody else who's going to set up in competition with them and maybe negotiate better deals or better contracts with the employer. Their job is to maintain labour discipline, to use the workforce as a tool for maintaining the government that they favour, this case being the ALP Greens government. It's all about maintaining the stability of that government. So they don't give a damn about what your standard of living comes to as long as they're in control.
Interesting to note, John, that the Peter Marshall, head of the Firefighters Union, was out actively campaigning for Adam Bandt and the Greens Party.
That's shocking.
I mean, yeah, that just goes to show you. Johnny.
Well, Adam Bandt worked for Slater and Gordon, which is the most left-wing Labor firm in Melbourne. A lot of the Greens work for Slater and Gordon. A lot of the Labor people did too, and that's always been where the left-wing lawyers go. And so that is very much a big part of the Labor movement.
Trevor, I wonder whether the way we communicate with people is becoming an issue or a strategy that we're overlooking. During the election campaign, I remember seeing billboards approaching the voting station, and it was all in Arabic. Everything was there wasn't hardly an English word to be seen. I mean, Australia has now become a country of immigrants, and I'd suggest, unfortunately, a lot of those people don't even speak English or are very limited, and they're usually working in these areas where Labor has domination, in trade union areas, low-paid workers in cleaning areas at hospitals, etc. I mean, does Club Grubbery need to, put our message out into 8 languages to get through to these people?
Well, you don't give, like, anybody's here as potential, but look, 30% of the current Australian voters are foreign born. 30%. That's way bigger than America or Britain or any other country. And I would suggest that's been deliberate policy. And I have nothing against people from other countries who come there or whatever, but it was always understood for a long time in Australia, you could come to Australia, but you had to become an Australian. You had to learn English. You had to learn the customs and the traditions of Australia, serve in the military, do what you like. They are bringing in people they know that will not easily assimilate and will ghettoize. And then they can centralize them in certain areas. They get control over whole cities. They're very selective of where they put these people, so that they can control, most of Melbourne. They can control large chunks of Sydney, and then these people create a constituency, and they are almost all controlled by the left. Most of the Muslim communities in Australia are controlled by radical leftists. Most of the Chinese communities are similar. So they become voting blocks and ghettoized. And this creates an us and them situation. And Australians react to that. Then they get accused of being racists. And this whole thing. And then you got hate speech laws to shut them up, which makes people more resentful. See, look, any any decent parent will tell you, if you want to destroy your family, treat your children unequally. Treat them by a different standard.
Yep.
Pay them different amounts of pocket money, whatever it is. Be harsh on one and soft on another. You'll wreck your family. Well, what's Australia going to be like when you got all these different families all treated by different standards? Some get taught in their own language. They get special programs. They get special ESOL programs, all this kind of thing. This is a recipe for disaster. But I say it's a deliberate recipe for disaster. The left knew what it was doing when it brought these people into the country. It was the Democrats who opened up immigration from all over the world in the States. It was Labor that did it in Britain. It was the left that did it in Germany, and it was the left that did it in Australia. Because they want to bring in people who are not going to easily fit in, who can be easily manipulated and given a sense of grievance. And Labor is all about fulfilling grievances, or pandering to grievances. So I think this is what Australians got to understand. This is a deliberate policy. This is not just stupidity. This is deliberate policy to wreck your country. And it's been done in Canada. It's been done in New Zealand. I think we've got nearly 1 million Chinese in New Zealand now, and 5 million people. Something might be 500,000, but you cannot maintain your culture by bringing in huge numbers of immigrants at that rate. Like in the United States after World War I, they brought in millions of immigrants, and then they basically closed off immigration for 50 years to allow people to integrate, to become Americans, to learn the culture. They knew if they just kept on at that pace, they were going to balkanize their country. Well, Democrats started it all up again, and now they have balkanized the country. But that's, when you got 30% of your country not born in Australia, that's hard to maintain your culture. I don't care what anybody says. You know that's true.
It appears that the left wing are keen to maintain division because divide and conquer is obviously clearly, and diversity and division seem to come out of the same
Mm.
word structure. We also
Mm.
have this situation where you're importing large chunks of people from different ethnic backgrounds and different faith backgrounds. So we've got a division of faith where they're pitching Islam and Christianity and Judaism against one another and maintaining that division. So that the country that's founded on basic biblical principles by Christian men in 1900 is now in a situation where all that is being broken down because you can't talk about the basics that founded that faith-based constitution in a society where you've got Muslims and Hindus and other people flourishing. It's all about division, isn't it?
It is, and you can't, look, everybody with any sense knows that the best countries in the world were founded on Christian values.
Yeah.
They are the countries where there was most tolerance, most economic progress, most literature, most, the greatest culture. They are all the countries, and they've done most to civilize. Well, this is something we all knew to be true many years ago. Not that we looked down on other people, but we accepted that Christianity was the civilizing force,
Yeah.
that it's the most benevolent religion out there. It's not a religion of vengeance like Islam can be at times. It's a vision of forgiveness. It's a religion of forgiveness and personal responsibility and working to make things better. It's a very noble thing. So if you're going to break that down, and now Christians have to pretty much apologize for being Christians, they certainly can't say that Australia was founded on Christian principles. You imagine a politician who got up and said that today, they get a hard time for it. Where it's self-evident, it's an unassailable truth. But if you've got hate speech laws, there's actually teeth. The left can actually stop you saying this kind of thing. And that's the reason why we have hate speech laws. Hate speech laws are not to create better race relations. They are to further balkanize people so you can't even say truth. You cannot get out of any situation unless you state the honest problem, and you can't even joke. When you're a kid, you always used to joke. You'd have Irish jokes, you'd have jokes about Italian jokes, and they would have, Aussie jokes and whatever. And humor diffuses these situations. Well, you can't even do that now. So the pressure cooker builds up, doesn't it? And it explodes eventually.
We never took ourselves so seriously in years gone by, and now everybody's bloated on entitlement and quick to offence. Everyone is offended, perpetually offended, and that the Greens Party, Sarah Hanson-Young's a prime example of that. She's perpetually offended in the Parliament and makes a big issue out of everything. We've seen political candidates running in the so-called freedom movement who are suing one another because they're offended. They were maligned. Hello, I thought you went into politics. Isn't that what when you go into politics, people are going to try and bring you down. You can't sue everybody who says something not nice about you, for goodness sake. And I'm talking about one.
But look, that's we're brought up in culture where truth mattered, and telling the truth is going to offend people. I know this is what I say. If I tell a lie and you call me out on it, I've got a problem. But if I tell the truth and you are offended by that, that's your problem. The truth is the truth. And if you're offended by the truth, you've got a problem. You are out of connection to truth. And that's a very bad path to be on. So, a tolerant society is not one where you can't criticize your neighbor or tell a few jokes. A tolerant society is where you can, and people just laugh back. You tell a Pommy joke and the Pommy tells an Aussie joke, and you have a bit of banter and it's all good, But okay, imagine if in 1963 they'd banned telling pommy jokes in Australia. You think that would have increased the acceptance of English immigrants into the country?
Irish comedian Dave Allen in Australia made
Oh yeah, Dave Allen, yeah.
Dave Allen made a mozza out of mocking Australians in their own country, and they loved him.
Oh, exactly.
We didn't
Because
take
you do, yeah. But that humor, even comedy is very. It's changed. I used to love watching those old Reagan roasts,
yeah.
Ronald Reagan, and you'd have Nipsey Russell, who was black, and you'd have a Jewish guy, and they'd all slag off about Puerto Ricans and Jews, and they'd all laugh, and it was all hilarious, and nobody got offended.
Not even Reagan.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Did you hear about the blind man that got a cheese grater for Christmas? It was the most violent
No.
book he ever read.
Oh, final question, John. Final question. We've got to let Trevor go.
Where do we go
Well,
from
can
here, Trevor?
can I just tell people what the name of the
Yeah.
book is to us?
Go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, yeah. It's because I do want people to read it, and I'd love to make a documentary about it, but it's called Comrade Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's 40-year alliance with Australian communism. So it explains the voice. It explains Albanese's green policies. It exposes top guys in the unions, top guys in his cabinet. It's a book about the communist movement in Australia and Albanese's role in it. And you can get it on Amazon. It's not in bookstores. It's no bookstore would take it, but it's on Amazon and selling very nicely. Thank you.
Very good. And what was the movie you were talking about before, Hoodie? Is that something that people would obviously be wanting to watch? Or
Well, everybody should watch it. You might describe the theme of it all, Trevor.
Yeah, it was a movie called Enemies Within the Church,
Mhm.
and it's about the Marxist infiltration of the churches. And I'm talking virtually every church, even the evangelical churches and even the Baptists, because the Marxists figured out a long time ago that if you want to get influence over a population, you don't fight their religion, you infiltrate their religion and change it around. We often hear the phrase the woke church. That church is really woke. They're all about white privilege. They're all about global warming. They never talk about sin or the Old Testament or any of that old-fashioned stuff.
Yeah.
It's all about this trend. Well, wokeism is Marxism. Wokeism is 100% Marxism, mainly the Chinese Maoist variety. And that's in virtually every church in Australia to some degree now. And every church, and it's all over the United States. But that's changing the culture. The churches where we used to look for moral guidance. You might have been a ratbag. You might have been the worst drunken vagabond round town, but at least you respected the church. At least you understood that the Ten Commandments were actually good things. Even if you violated them on a daily basis, you still had some reverence for the church, right? Well, by bringing wokeism into the churches, that's destroyed that respect for the church. And so therefore people are morally rudderless and are more susceptible to these left-wing messages, this revolutionary garbage. If you don't know what you stand for, you'll fall for anything. That's what it's about. And it's called Enemies Within the Church. And I'm going to find out why you couldn't get it on live stream. Graham, because
Albo would have to be an enemy of the church, wouldn't he? I mean, here's a bloke that claims to be a Catholic, does an affirmation, not an oath, turns up to the induction of the Pope wearing an Akubra hat. I mean, I thought you were supposed to take your hat off when you were inside a ceremony, but obviously not when you're the Prime Minister of a communist country like Australia. What do you make of the new Pope?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of mixed opinions about that. I'm sorry, I have to say, I think it's going to be continuation of Pope Francis, who was pretty much a Marxist. Yeah. And I know that I don't say that to offend Catholics. I just say it because that's the truth. He was actually working with hardcore communists, former East German communists, right up till his death. And so I think the new Pope will seem more moderate and try and pull things together. But I don't think we're going to see a return to the really pure Catholicism you might have seen pre-Vatican II. I don't think that's on the cards, unfortunately. I'd like to see it happen, but I think there's actually probably going to be a split in the Catholic Church at some point in the future, between the more traditional church and the more progressive church. That's what I think is going to happen.
Well, we have to remember when we talked about fanaticism and other religions and the cruelty and hatred, we've got to remember that America was founded on papal hatred in Europe when the founding fathers sailed across to escape it on the Mayflower. And, we've also got to remember that throughout history, 60 million people were murdered in the name of the papacy during inquisitions and some such things. So that's not an attack on Catholicism. That's an attack on a papal system of government, which is another reason why church and state should be separate. You have a nation state of the Vatican, which is involved in all kinds of politics and manipulations around the world, which don't serve Catholics, Muslims, or anybody else. It doesn't serve Christians. So we have to look at these systems for what they are and realize that the people who follow them aren't bad people. We're just caught up. That's what the whole thing about come out of Babylon means in the book of Revelation. But, we're going a bit deep. But
well, yeah, look, I've always been of the view that you tend to find a better spiritual message in the small institutions, the small local churches, and the bigger a denomination gets, the more it gets prone to corruption and politics creeps in and that sort of thing. And there's been periods where the Catholic Church has been absolutely terrible, and periods where it's been pretty darn good and a leader. But any organization that gets real big and real centralized, and you couldn't get anything more centralized than the Catholic Church, you'll get problems, and so I don't say that to criticize Catholics. I think every Christian denomination has its issues, its problems right now, wokeism being the biggest of them, but leads to all sorts of other things as well. But I think what's going to save us spiritually are the small churches, the local parish priest who takes a stand, the local pastor, the little home churches. I think that's where the real future of spirituality lies, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you, mate. That's why we do Church Without Walls, and it's been great. It's just growing gradually and spreading out, and we don't want it to grow big. We just want it to satellite and do its thing and let people make it.
You don't want to be you don't want to be the Pope of Australia, do you?
The world. I don't want to be the Pope. No. I don't even. The thing about it all is we've got to come back to basic Christian principles and values. And if we do that, we live a better life. And if we live a better life, we enhance our personality, our characters are enhanced, and that spreads to other people who like the way that we live, and they want to live like that too. That's the whole reason Church Without Walls is starting to flourish.
That's how Christianity was founded. It wasn't founded as a political mission. It was founded by people accepting Christian teachings and becoming better people and setting an example and proselytizing. And for the first few hundred years of Christianity, that was just about a death sentence.
Yeah.
If the Romans caught you're going to end up, it's going to be pretty rough for you, but they still did it.
Yeah.
Because the power of belief, the faith was so strong. And I think that's really what we're going to have to see going forward.
Well, the pagans of Rome couldn't believe and understand why the Christians who were being burned alive in the Colosseum and torn apart by lions were singing praises to God. And that's what helped to convert Rome from a pagan nation to Christianity. Yeah. Anyway.
Oh, you got to be look. Faith and courage go together. When you see courage like that, that person's faith is stronger than yours because you couldn't do that. That's faith and courage go together.
Well, clearly, Trevor Louden, we are at the crossroads of this world, and we're at the pointy end of the spear. There's no doubt about it. Those of us who are talking about these things are we need to keep talking, and that's why independent media is very, very important. I wonder, Trevor, if funds were miraculously to appear from somewhere, whether you would consider coming to Australia to make your documentary.
Yeah, absolutely, I would. It's not hard to get me in the Southern Hemisphere. As long as I could nip over to New Zealand from time to time. Yeah, no, I would. I would very much like to do that. I think it would have a big impact, and you're not talking huge amounts of money, but truth well presented could have a very powerful effect on Australia in the next few years. I know that there's several movies that have been put out that have impacted millions of people. We've seen that, and people, I'd absolutely consider it.
Well, yeah, I think you mentioned to some last time we spoke of, you can do a lot with $250,000 to make a good
Yeah,
documentary. So let's plan
it depends how much voluntary labor. It depends, on who's going to contribute, what their fees are. We made I think we made our Enemies Within the Church for 250 grand. We made the one before that for about 200. But that's, if you have all the money up front, it's usually cheaper. Usually what we do, we raise some money, do some of the movie, then raise some more money and do a bit more. And that's not the cheapest way of doing it. So
Let's put in for a government grant from Albo.
yeah. Well, let's do it. Look, it's about you, Albo. We're going to make a documentary about you. How about flipping us $1 million? If look, I know you got to spend it all on the voice and that, but you should be able to spare $1 million to immortalize you.
And his new driveway, yeah. Hey, Johnny, Trevor was talking about volunteer labour. You could volunteer to be the editor.
I was just about to say, Hoodie, that could be your contribution.
Stuart Robertson will tell you how bad I do at that. Anyway, look, I think
the thing's worth doing is worth doing well, and I always aim for really good production values, but the message is the thing. The message sells itself, and I think people are crying out for truth in Australia right now. You got over 60% of the population did not vote for this direction, and they're feeling it. You're seeing that it's the farmers of Victoria are feeling it right now, right in their pocketbooks, and they're the first, but they ain't going to be the last. There's going to be a big chunk of people who want a different direction, but they're a bit lacking on knowledge of why this is happening, and they're a bit lacking on knowledge of how to get out of this on an organised basis. And I think a well-produced documentary can help that a lot.
Well, I think people that support the Liberal Party should be getting behind that as well, because if they've got any hope of changing governments in 3 years' time, it'll rely heavily on prioritising things like this, getting a documentary out that can actually make a difference, and paying someone to do it in Mandarin as well.
Well, look. We translated our Enemies Within the Church to several languages. Look, and that's what I see. This is the thing. The left understands the value of changing the culture. We tend to underestimate that. It's the culture. The culture used to be led by Christianity, and we all accepted the values, and it drove our culture. Well, that's been thrown out the window, and so now the culture on the right tends to be just about making money and economics, which is all good, but it doesn't inspire people to be heroic. It doesn't, it's faith, family, and freedom that drive people.
Look, this could be
and so that culture, that's cultural. That's not financial. That's cultural.
I think, Hoodie, this could be something we could bring up at the Independent Media Summit as well. This is a really big opportunity here to get involved in something that could be really significant to the future of this country.
I think also it needs to be said to all the people who watch this. At the moment, we don't know how big the crowd is in Melbourne, but it'll be substantial and it'll be highly mechanised because they're driving trucks and whatever in there. And they spoke about how the police were very good to them, not like they were to the protesters about the mandates. Now, I've got to say this to Australians. That crowd behind John in that photo was huge, but it could have been a whole lot better and a whole lot bigger if the farmers who are now protesting were there for that one. We should all be doing this together. And the policy of division brought about by the media and the Labor governments to discredit us all and make us look like idiots is often enhanced by some within our own ranks because some of us are. So we've got to realise that we have a role to play. We have a purpose that involves a whole raft of agendas that need to be brought together in one heap to make this country change course. It's up to you. And I want to say again, don't go hating on Chinese people in Australia. Don't go hating on the Jews in Australia. Don't go hating on the people who want to see equity for white people as well. Don't go hating on the First Nations people. You know, we've got to stop the hatred and start the compassion and the love, because without that, we're not going to achieve anything. And anything we did achieve is not going to be worth the steam off a cup of tea. Let's be honest. If it isn't in love and it isn't in compassion, it's not worth the steam off your piddle. Can we be more frank than that? So I want to invoke the power of the Holy Spirit in a prayer as we close this off, and we'll come back for closing comments. Can I do that? Lord Father in heaven, we thank you for the spirit of compassion and grace and mercy. Everything about you is love, grace, and mercy. Everything about you is compassion and forgiveness. And none of that is served when we turn to hatred of other people. We can loathe systems that bring about this. We can loathe different political systems and control systems in the world that do that. That is not only our right, it's our duty. It's our duty for good people to break bad laws. But Father God, it is not our duty to hate on our fellow man. And we must stop doing that. And we will be censored badly if we do. So Lord, we pray for your Holy Spirit's intervention to make sure that every step we take is guided by that Spirit for the right reasons, not for control, not for greed, not for envy or any other fruits of following Satan. So Father, help us to bathe in the light of truth, not only for our own sakes, but for our country's sake and for the sake of humanity. Guide and lead us is our prayer at this time, in the precious name of Jesus, who gave up so much for so many. We pray in his name. Amen. Trevor, we want to keep this ball rolling with you. I think it's really important, and you've been very open and approachable to do that. So I'd love to get you back on even in 3 or 4 weeks' time.
Yeah. Look, happy to. Look, things are rolling out pretty fast, and yeah, I'm very happy to be involved. And you know, I just think Australia is such an important country, and you know, like how Australia goes is going to determine the fate of the whole Southwest Pacific. You know, so. Yeah, we need to be involved here. I'm happy to help if I can.
Well, I've still got about 30 questions I wanted to ask you, and it's going to drag it on for too long. We haven't discussed Kevin Rudd in all of this stuff, and I don't want to start you now because I'm sure that's a whole other story. But thanks for being so gracious with your time and for your talent. Please hold your book up again. Have you got it there? Comrade Prime Minister, available through Amazon. I'll be getting my copy today. I haven't had time to get one, but I will be getting one today. And the movie Enemies Within the Church, do what you can to have a look at that one as well, because it's all interrelated. You know, my own denomination is going through upheavals. There's a shaking going on in faith-based communities as well. So let's get on with it. Johnny, you've often been heard to say,
you just couldn't make this stuff up.
You couldn't make this stuff up. And don't forget Australia. What you did yesterday got you to today. But if you love this country, for goodness sake, wake up. And for goodness sake, stand up, because that's all it takes. Just stand. You don't have to grab a rifle or pick up an axe. Just stand in peace and compassion, but in the power of the Holy Spirit. We thank you all for watching Club Grubbery, and we'll be back next time. Thanks so much, Trevor Louden. You're a gem.
Thank you so much, guys. It was really nice talking to you, and thanks to all the audience.
Okay. God bless you all and bye for now.